The screen splits in two. On the left, Barack Obama stands at a lectern in the East Room of the White House. The room is hushed, heavy with the weight of history. He begins softly, his tone solemn, measured. Tonight, 2 syllables and the air shifts. The nation knows something irreversible is about to be said. On the right, years later, Donald Trump leans toward the microphone, eyes scanning the cameras like an entertainer checking his crowd. His voice is sharp, unrestrained. He died like a dog. Laughter erupts from a few corners, but the tone isn't reverence, it's spectacle. 2 victories. 2 terrorist leaders dead. 2 presidents narrating the moment. Yet from the very first words, the contrast is electric. Obama's voice belongs to the collective, as though he is carrying the grief of a nation in his cadence. Trump's belongs to himself, swollen with performance, dripping with mockery. For viewers watching live, the whiplash between dignity and derision could not have been sharper. One sounds like a statesman guiding a wounded country toward closure. The other like a showman tossing red meat to a restless audience. The weight of the moment rests not only in the facts, that 2 of the most notorious terrorists of the century had been eliminated, but in the way those facts were told. Words matter. Tone matters. Leadership is not just about outcomes, but about how outcomes are delivered. One speech invited unity, a chance for Americans to breathe together after years of fear. The other turned triumph into a punchline, leaving allies and citizens alike wondering what America's victories now sounded like to the world. When history remembers America's moments of triumph, which voice will echo louder? The soft, grave steadiness of a leader who chose restraint, or the brash, mocking taunt of a man who turned national security into theater? That is the heart of this story. Not just what happened, but America has lived under the shadow of terrorism. The scars of September 11th weren't just physical. They were emotional, cultural, existential. The smoke that poured from the towers was more than destruction. It was a shattering of the nation's sense of safety. And from that day forward, every battle, every mission, every pursuit of terrorist leaders became more than just a line in military history. They became symbols. Symbols of resilience, justice, and above all, closure. When a terrorist mastermind is taken down, the bullets and the bombs are only part of the story. The larger victory is psychological. For families who lost loved ones, it means a name crossed off the ledger of pain. For soldiers who sacrificed, it validates every night spent in desert sands, every mission in hostile territory. For citizens who felt powerless watching chaos unfold, it restores some measure of control. A takedown is not just about killing the enemy, it's about telling the nation, we are safe again. We are strong again. We do not forget. That's why the presidential address in these moments matters almost as much as the mission itself. The cameras don't just capture a leader speaking, they capture history being written. A president's words in that moment echo far beyond the walls of the White House. They settle into the hearts of millions. The tone, the choice of words, the balance between victory and humility, all of it signals how the nation should process the event. Is it a solemn chapter of justice fulfilled? Or is it a chance to gloat, to mock, to turn death into entertainment? The audience expects dignity. They expect the president to stand tall, not for himself, but for them, for the grieving mother, the veteran carrying scars, the citizen still haunted by headlines. They expect closure, not bravado. They expect reassurance that America is not only powerful but principled, that its victories are marked by solemnity, enter politics the way most presidents did. He wasn't forged in the crucible of public service, or tested in the slow grind of government. He came from boardrooms, tabloids, and the glow of reality television. His empire was built on spectacle, on the art of making headlines louder than the substance beneath them. He branded himself a mogul, a master of the deal, a man who could bend the world to his image. By the time he stepped into the Oval Office, Trump wasn't just a politician, he was the embodiment of his own brand. His campaign had been run like a production, complete with slogans, catchphrases, and rallies that felt less like civic engagement, and more like primetime entertainment. For his supporters, that showmanship was refreshing, even magnetic. For his critics, it was dangerous. Either way, the man who once fired contestants on television now commanded the nuclear codes, and he carried with him the same instinct. Dominate the room, command the cameras, make sure the spotlight never strays. This instinct colored everything he touched. Where previous presidents spoke of alliances, he spoke of deals. Where others leaned on institutions, he distrusted them. Intelligence agencies, career diplomats, seasoned generals, he dismissed them as part of a deep state when they offered inconvenient truths. Yet, paradoxically, when their painstaking work yielded a victory, he rushed to seize the credit. The contradiction was never lost on observers. Here was a man who scorned the very experts who hunted America's enemies, only to bask in the glory of their success. And so, when ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was cornered and killed in 2019, Trump faced the moment every president dreads and craves. The moment to tell the nation that a villain had fallen. For many leaders, it would have been an opportunity to unite the country. To pay respect to those who sacrificed to the presidency did not come from spectacle. His story was quieter, more deliberate, more rooted in the patient work of ideas. He began not with the flash of television cameras but in classrooms, where he taught constitutional law, and in neighborhoods on Chicago's South Side, where he organized communities grappling with poverty, unemployment, and disillusionment. To many, this dual identity, a scholar of law and a servant of people, defined the man long before he set foot in the Oval Office. Unlike the businessman-turned-showman who would follow him, Obama's career carried the marks of slow, careful preparation. He wasn't selling an image. He was building a record of listening, deliberating, and weaving coalitions across divides. His intellect was sharpened by academia, but his heart was tempered by the voices of everyday Americans who longed for dignity in a system that often overlooked them. For Obama, leadership was not about dominance. It was about responsibility. By the time he assumed the presidency in 2009, the nation was weary. It had been nearly 8 years since September 11, 2001, and the wounds of that day still pulsed in the national psyche. Families who had lost loved ones in the Twin Towers at the Pentagon and in a Pennsylvania field had endured not only grief, but the long, uncertain pursuit of justice. America's war in Afghanistan dragged on. Its war in Iraq fractured trust, and the once clear objective, finding Osama Bin Laden, seemed to recede further into the shadows. Obama inherited a war on terror that was sprawling, messy, and politically toxic. Yet, unlike his predecessor and unlike his successor, he did not treat the mission as his personal crusade. He approached it as a solemn duty, a mandate given not to glorify his own image, but to restore faith in America's institutions. His temperament, marked by restraint and patience, became both his greatest strength, and his striking wasn't just what he said, but what he didn't. He resisted the temptation to gloat. He didn't describe Bin Laden's final moments in lurid detail. He didn't turn the announcement into theater. Instead, he grounded it in dignity, in collective achievement. "We give thanks for the men who carried out this operation," he said. "Not I ordered, not my decision, but gratitude toward those who risked everything." That deliberate humility placed the emphasis where it belonged. On service, on sacrifice, on the people rather than the politician. Families of the fallen felt something shift. It wasn't triumph shouted from the rooftops. It was a quiet exhale, a recognition that justice, however delayed, had arrived with solemnity. Obama positioned himself not as the star of the story, but as the steward of its conclusion. He embodied a servant of history, not its celebrity. That choice carried weight far beyond that night, because it set a precedent. America's greatest victories are not branded events. They are moments of unity. And then came the defining moment, the words that crystallized the tone for a generation. His opening line, delivered in that calm, measured cadence, didn't gloat or dramatize. It began simply. "Tonight, I can report to the American people." It was a statement designed not for ratings, not for applause, but for history itself. That first word, tonight, was less about him and more about them, the millions waiting to hear that the chapter was finally closing. Yet to fully understand why that night feels etched in memory as a moment of collective dignity, we have to hold it up against what came 8 years later, when another president faced his own chance to speak to history. Because when Donald Trump announced the death of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the head of ISIS, the contrast was immediate, not with visceral, fireworks, and almost not with chest-thumping bravado, but with a line so spare and understated that it carried the weight of an entire decade. Obama stood before the cameras in May 2011, speaking to a nation still scarred by the smoke and ash of 9/11. "We give thanks for the men who carried out this operation," he said. The phrasing was deliberate. Not "I give thanks." Not "my administration carried out this operation." It was collective, communal, almost liturgical. The pronoun mattered. We. In that single syllable he invited every American, Democrat, Republican, soldier, civilian victim's family, to step onto the same stage of history. Contrast that with the flourish years later. Trump, announcing the killing of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi in 2019, reached for theater. He died whimpering, crying. Trump boomed. The details were unverified, but the imagery was raw, almost cinematic in its cruelty. Where Obama's rhetoric gave dignity to those who risked everything, Trump's was meant to humiliate the enemy, to offer the public a spectacle of dominance. This wasn't just two speeches. It was two philosophies of leadership colliding in real time. Line by line, the contrast plays out like a debate no moderator could ever script. Obama's speech, brief, solemn, each word weighed like a judge's verdict. Trump's speech, sprawling, improvisational, peppered with gory detail, as if he were narrating a prize fight. Obama. Tonight, we are reminded that America can do whatever we set our mind to. It's aspirational, binding the nation to an idea larger than any one man. Trump. He was a sick and depraved man, and now he's gone. Personal, blunt, almost taunting. Obama's line reads like history etched in marble. Trump's like graffiti scrawled in spray paint across a wall. Cinematically, it feels like two characters facing off in different genres of film. Obama is the statesman in a quiet political thriller, tension carried in silence, and the space reflected this divide. News anchors replayed Obama's 10-minute address, marveling at its restraint, calling it presidential in the purest sense. Even critics who despised his policies conceded he struck the right tone. When Trump delivered his 40-minute monologue about Baghdadi's final moments, the immediate response was different. Some supporters cheered the bluntness, arguing it projected strength. But across mainstream outlets, there was hesitation. Fact-checkers noting the unverified claims, commentators remarking on the almost gleeful description of death. Historians were quicker to place the contrast into context. Doris Kearns Goodwin called Obama's speech an echo of Lincolnian brevity, noting how he framed the event as a chapter in America's story rather than a notch on his own belt. Another scholar described Trump's remarks as the first viral military speech, designed less for the archive than for the meme. Where Obama spoke to posterity, Trump spoke to the moment. And yet, the mic drop wasn't an Obama trying to outboast Trump. His counterattack was subtler, sharper. Dignity itself became the weapon. By refusing spectacle, by declining to revel in gore or humiliation, Obama made Trump's style look smaller by comparison. It was as if Obama, years earlier, had walked off stage, leaving behind a standard so high that any descent into theatrics would look gaudy. Picture it cinematically. Obama steps into the frame, delivers a measured line, exits. The silence afterward is deafening. Then years later, Trump storms in, filling the room with noise, detail, bravado. But against the ghost of Obama's quiet presence, the loudness doesn't feel commanding. It feels defensive, as though trying to drown out a memory that still lingers. The brilliance of Obama's approach is that it ages well. His words are replayed not because they shock, what we witnessed was not just two military victories, but two competing visions of leadership. On one side, dignity, quiet, measured, respectful of the moment's gravity. On the other, arrogance, loud, theatrical, desperate for applause. Both men delivered news of triumph, but the tone of their words carried a moral weight that outlasted the facts themselves. When a president speaks to a grieving nation, or to a world watching with wary eyes, every syllable becomes more than speech. It becomes a reflection of what America stands for. And the contrast could not have been sharper. Obama's announcement was not a performance. It was a solemn invocation of unity, a recognition of sacrifice, and a reassurance that justice, though delayed, had been served. He carried the weight of 10 years of sorrow on his shoulders, and chose words that lifted, not words that mocked. His language became a balm for families who had spent nearly a decade waiting for closure. His silence between sentences mattered as much as the sentences themselves. Dignity, in that moment, became a gift to the people. Trump, in his moment, chose differently. His words were not built to heal, but to dominate. They were sharp edges meant to cut, to humiliate the enemy in death as though mocking him made the victory greater. Yet the result was something smaller, an echo of bravado that distracted from the collective courage of those who carried out the mission. Instead of binding Americans together in gratitude, his language fractured the moment into spectacle. Arrogance, disguised as patriotism, shrank what could have been a unifying story into just another episode of reality television. And this is the moral truth the two speeches reveal. Leadership is not about the event itself. It is about the way a leader chooses to tell it. Words can elevate or degrade. They can unite or divide. Victory without dignity is hollow. Victory with humility becomes history. Two Americas. The stories of these nights live side by side in the nation's memory, not only for what was accomplished, but for how it was announced. One gave us a unifying voice of history. The other gave us a spectacle of self. Together, they show us a choice every leader faces: to serve the people or to serve themselves. History has already started answering that choice. The words that carry forward are not the ones soaked in mockery, but the ones infused with dignity. And so, the question we ask is simple. When the next president announces the next victory, what kind of voice do we want echoing through history? That's the reflection that matters. Because someday soon, another name will fall, another mission will succeed, another leader will step to the microphone. And in that moment, the whole world will lean in. Will the words heal or divide? Will the voice unite or diminish? That is not just about them. It is about us, about the leadership we choose, and the standards we demand. If you believe in dignity over mockery, in leadership as service rather than spectacle, join this conversation. Subscribe, share, and let your voice be part of the America that refuses to settle for arrogance. Because the story of a nation is never just in the battles it wins. It is in the way those victories are told. And one day, another voice will announce another victory. When it does, history will be listening. And so will we.